Hello, and let's dive into reactions today. And we're going to be looking at 2.4 and 2.5 in your book, and that's the reactions and then how enzymes facilitate reactions. So, we've been talking about all of these organic molecules, but how does our body and how do trees, how do amoeba, bacteria, how do they work with these molecules? So, for instance, if you sit down and eat a sandwich, and let's say it's a turkey sandwich, you've got the starch in your bread, you've got the protein in the turkey. What does your body do? Well, it's going to take the starch and break down the starch into glucose. So, it's going to take that big polysaccharide and then break it down into glucose, the monosaccharide. And then it's going to use the glucose to build glycogen in its muscle and liver, in our muscle and liver. And then the turkey is going to be broken down into amino acids because that's what proteins are made of. So we're talking about reactions here, the fact that your body can convert molecules from one to another, the fact that it can break down things, build things up. That's what we're talking about. So, all throughout our lesson today, you're going to look at the events of a reaction, identifying the parts of a chemical reaction, reactants, and products. You're going to describe the difference between an exothermic and endothermic reaction. And then you're going to explain how reactants need activation energy. And then you're going to describe how an enzyme works and how it interacts with a substrate. So finally, we're going to construct a diagram showing the interactions of a substrate and an enzyme. And you're going to explain what happens to the shape of an enzyme during denaturation. And you'll do that as part of a lab demo and how this affects the activity of an enzyme. So let's go ahead and dive in. So in this lesson, you're going to really just learn about the reactions. According to your homework and in your book, you were learning about a chemical equation. And over here on the left-hand side, you see that a chemical equation is made up of reactants. So everything on the left would be what is reacting together, what combines. So in this case, glucose is combining with oxygen. And then we're going to yield, that's going to give rise to our products. In this case, carbon dioxide and water. Now, just to clarify, and you've probably had this in a previous class, but just to review or clarify, C6H12O6, and based upon that ratio, 12 to 6, that means it's a carbohydrate. So that 12 is called a subscript. Well, that means that I have 12 hydrogen in this molecule. But if you have a larger number in front of a molecule, we call that a coefficient. That simply means that we have 6 molecules of oxygen, 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, and 6 molecules of water. So that's just a quick review of a chemical equation. Everything to the left, reactant, everything to the right, product. So let's take a look at this little short video here, this GIF or GIF. Notice we've got 2 reactants. We've got the blue circles and red squares. So the reactants are the circles and squares. And then notice at the end, the very end of our little video, boom, they've joined together. And so our product would be the square and circle combined together. Circle square. So our reactants would be the circles and squares. The product would be circle square. So you have a place to put this in your Google Slides. Go ahead and fill that in. Now, there's something very helpful about this little graphic demonstration here. And I want you to think about that in our next slide. Now, you know from previous science classes that molecules are always moving. Notice the blue circles and the red squares are just moving about. Increasing the temperature will change that. Think about that for a second. So notice this. The red and the blue are colliding. Right in the beginning, boom, there's a collision, there's a collision. But those two initial collisions are not producing a reaction. So this first one, and then they bump into each other. They just bounce off of each other. It's only that last interaction that produces an actual change. So I want you to give it some thought and come up with a description that leads to why that last interaction allowed that last collision allowed a reaction to take place. So hopefully, as you hit pause, you'll be able to do that, describe the specific events. What you should be thinking about is it's only when those molecules are actually facing one another and those two black lines are towards each other that a reaction can actually take place. And that's what we really want to hammer home. Reactions require a certain amount of energy and a certain orientation in order to interact. Uh, so, what we call that certain amount of energy is the activation energy. The activation energy is the amount of energy required to start a reaction, to kind of get that reaction going, to change the bonds holding those atoms together. So, for instance, in this image, the blue circles are held together by a bond, and then the green circles are connected together too. In order for the reaction to take place, we would need to break those bonds, and that requires energy. Now, here's where we get into the different types of reactions. And there's two that we want to focus on based upon their energy. Now, notice in our graph, the x-axis is just mapping out the reaction. So we have reactants on our left, products on our right. The y-axis is dealing with the amount of energy. So watch what happens in this example. The reactants have a high amount of energy. You then have to boost the energy up. That's the activation energy. And then it falls down to a lower energy level. And as it does so, it gives off heat. So we call these reactions exothermic reactions. Exo, exit, and notice the heat is leaving. So nice tie into the word. Exothermic, thermic is heat. So exo, leaving, thermic, heat. You see that little squiggle where the heat leaves right here, that's an exothermic reaction. So where it gives off heat energy. So that needs to be a recognizable graph. The reactants have a higher energy than the products, and you give off heat. We do this when we're breaking down molecules a lot. We have reactions that are exothermic and release energy. But we also engage in endothermic reactions where we actually build molecules. And by building, we have to get over the activation energy. And then what we then have would be our products, which have a higher amount of energy than the reactants. So notice in our GIF or whatever, the reactants are absorbing energy and then they have to overcome the activation energy, that amount of energy needed. It goes boom system, it has to go up, and then to the products. So reactions absorb energy. Now, we do this when we're building things. So building glycogen, building proteins, building DNA. We're going to need energy to accomplish this. So you're going to see this occasionally this semester, endothermic. And notice endo means in. We're putting in heat. Cold packs, if you've ever used a cold pack where you squeeze the bag and you mix the chemicals, and then suddenly it's cold. Well, the reason it's cold is because it's pulling heat from you. And that's what makes it so nice for a sprained ankle. You put it on and it's pulling the heat, the swelling away from the injury, because it's an endothermic reaction. All right. So there's going to be a little activity for you to practice labeling. Remember, the large hill in the middle is going to be the activation energy, and then the difference is the the energy either given off or absorbed in the reaction. So the next slide will help you practice things. And then we're going to talk about how our bodies and any cell facilitates these reactions.